Walter sat by the window, watching his son's family bustle around the house with excitement. Suitcases lined the hallway. Hawaiian shirts were tossed onto chairs. Laughter echoed as his grandchildren shouted about beaches and volcanoes. Walter smiled faintly, waiting. Deep down, he hoped, just maybe, they'd ask him to come along. He had never been to Hawaii. In fact, it had been years since he had traveled anywhere beyond the local park. His joints ached, yes, but his spirit still longed for adventure. As David walked into the room, Walter straightened up a little, hopeful. "Dad," David began, adjusting his sunglasses, "I think it's best if you stay back and take care of the home." Walter's expression barely shifted, but something in his eyes dimmed. "You're too old to fly. Anyway," David added casually. "The flight, the heat, the walking. It's too much. Plus, someone needs to water the plants and keep an eye on things. You understand, right?" Walter nodded slowly. "Of course," he said softly. "You all have fun." His voice didn't crack. His face didn't fall. But inside, the sting was sharp. Not because he missed a vacation, but because he had been quietly erased from the picture, like a relic left behind. He helped load their bags into the car, kissed his grandchildren goodbye, and stood at the curb waving until their car disappeared around the corner. Then, silence. Back inside, the house felt different. Quieter. Colder. He looked at the calendar pinned above the kitchen counter, days blocked off for a family trip he wasn't welcome on. He sat at the table, pouring himself tea, and let the silence sit beside him. He didn't complain. He didn't sulk. But in that stillness, something shifted in him. He looked around at the walls he built with his own hands, the roof he once patched after a storm, the wooden railing he carved with his father, and realized this wasn't just a house. It was his legacy, and maybe it was time his son remembered that. The echo of the front door closing still lingered in the air as Walter stood alone in the quiet hallway. The sound of tires crunching over the driveway gravel faded into silence. They were gone, off to white sands and ocean breezes. And he. He moved slowly through the house, not like a man merely passing time, but like someone walking through a museum of his own life. Every room whispered a story. In the living room, he paused by the fireplace, running his fingers across the mantel. The tiny chip in the corner, that was David's doing when he was 6, playing sword fight with a broomstick. Walter never fixed it. It made him smile then, and now, it made him ache. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon, a ghost of his wife's Sunday baking. He opened the cupboard above the stove and found her recipe tin, still there. The top card was smudged, apple crumble, her favorite. He could almost hear her humming, apron dusted in flour, turning to wink at him. In David's old bedroom, now turned guest room, Walter sat on the edge of the bed. The wallpaper had changed, the furniture updated, but in his mind, it was still the room where he read bedtime stories, where monsters under the bed were defeated with a flashlight and a kiss on the forehead. The backyard called to him next. The old swing still hung from the tree, though the ropes were frayed now. He remembered pushing David for hours, the boys' laughter rising like music into the summer sky. This house, no, this home, wasn't just bricks and wood. It was stitched together with laughter, with arguments, with memories pressed into every creaking floorboard. Walter had painted these walls, fixed its plumbing, patched its roof with bare hands and tired bones. He hadn't just lived here. He had built this place into something sacred. To his son, it may now be just an asset. But to Walter, it was the last living piece of the life he shared with the woman he loved and the boy he raised. And today, for the first time in years, he saw it all clearly and knew he wasn't just the caretaker. He was the foundation. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Walter brewed his tea. He moved to tidy up the clutter his son had left behind in his rush to make the flight. A pile of papers, folders, and travel brochures scattered across the dining table. He reached to stack them neatly, but one thick envelope caught his eye. His name was printed on the corner. Curious, he opened it. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the documents, lines of legal language, clauses, and fine print. He adjusted his reading glasses, heart slowly quickening as the truth unraveled before him. The documents detailed a transfer of ownership agreement. His name, Walter Green, was marked as the current title holder, and below that, a prepared space for his signature. But it was blank. Attached was another sheet, correspondence with a real estate firm, a listing valuation, an email thread about liquidating assets before year-end. Walter's brow furrowed. Liquidating? Another line chilled him. Once the old man signs, we can move forward without delay. He won't know what hit him. His throat tightened. This wasn't about watching the house while they vacationed. It wasn't about keeping him safe from the flight or heat. This entire trip was a carefully orchestrated distraction. They needed him out of the way, alone, isolated, while they prepared to take away the one thing he still had left. He slowly sat down. The papers spread before him like betrayal etched in ink. This house, the one he built brick by brick, wasn't just being taken, it was being erased from him, and by his own son. Walter stayed out the window, not seeing the garden but reliving years of sacrifices. Late nights, double shifts, saving every penny to make sure David had a future. And now, this was the repayment. But as the shock settled, something else rose in its place. Clarity. They thought he was too old, too slow, too unaware, but they were wrong. He folded the documents, placed them back into the envelope, and set them beside his untouched tea. They thought I wouldn't notice, he thought quietly. But Walter had noticed. And now, he would act. Walter stood in the doorway of his old study, a room untouched by modern trends, filled with dark oak shelves, leather-bound books, and the smell of time. A place where he once wrote letters, balanced checkbooks, and planned every step of his family's future. Now, it felt like a vault of forgotten power. In the corner, behind the faded armchair, sat the small metal safe bolted into the floor. It had been years since he last opened it. The combination was muscle memory, a sequence tied to his wedding anniversary, a date no one else had cared to remember. Click, click, click. The lock gave way with a heavy clunk. Walter knelt and opened it slowly. Inside were the pieces of a life he once guarded fiercely. His wife's final letter, a bundle of savings bonds, and, carefully sealed in a yellowing folder, the original property deed. His heart beat louder now. He pulled it out, unfolded the pages, and there it was, clear and bold. Owner, Walter E. Green. Co-signer, none. No amendments. No transfers. No secondary names. He was still the sole legal owner. His son had assumed too much. Perhaps he thought the house had long ago shifted hands informally. Or maybe he assumed Walter wouldn't remember to keep things updated. But Walter had never stopped paying the taxes. Never removed his name. Never surrendered what he had worked for his entire life. He sat back in the chair, the papers in his lap like a shield. And then, with calm precision, he reached for the rotary phone on the desk, an old relic, but still wired and working. He dialed a number he hadn't used in a long while. Green & Associates Law Office, a voice answered. Marlene, Walter said quietly. It's Walter Green. Is Ed in? There was a pause. Mr. Green? It's been years. Of course, let me get him for you. Moments later, Ed's familiar voice came through. Walter, to what do I owe? I need to talk business, Walter said, eyes fixed on the deed. And this time, I'm not leaving anything to chance. And just like that, the game had changed. Quietly, legally, permanently. The law office hadn't changed in years. Same paneled walls, same dusty fern in the corner, same bell that chimed softly as Walter pushed the door open. A wave of familiarity washed over him, tinged with something sharper, resolve. Behind the desk, Marlene looked up and gasped. Mr. Green, my goodness, it's been ages. Walter smiled faintly. Figured it was time I dropped by. Mr. Pierce will be thrilled, she said, already dialing. Minutes later, Ed Pierce stepped out from his office, glasses perched on his nose, ties slightly loosened as always. Walter Green. Now that's a name that means something. Come on in. They settled into leather chairs, the air thick with memories. Ed poured 2 cups of coffee, sensing this wasn't just a friendly visit. Walter didn't waste time. He slid the manila folder across the desk. Read. Ed flipped through the contents, the property deed, the printed emails, and the unsigned transfer agreement. His face hardened. Is this from your son? Walter nodded once. Ed exhaled sharply. This is more than shady. It's coercive. He intended to push this through without your consent. That's what it looks like, Walter said quietly. He told me I was too old to travel with them. Just wanted me to watch the house. But I think he meant to sell it while I was distracted. Ed looked Walter squarely in the eyes. You still own the home outright. He has no legal claim, no leverage. You can lease it, gift it, sell it, anything you choose. He has no say unless you give it to him. Walter sat in stillness for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle. I built that home, he murmured. Every wall, every tile, every memory. But now, it feels heavier than it should. Ed watched his old friend closely. You don't owe anyone that weight, Walter. Not anymore. Walter looked down at his hands, once strong enough to carry lumber, now wrinkled but steady. Maybe it's time I moved on, he said softly. Without the weight. Ed nodded. Then let's talk options. And just like that, Walter wasn't the forgotten old man anymore. He was a man reclaiming the life he'd built. On his own terms. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the hallway clock. The same clock his wife once wound every Sunday afternoon. Walter stood in the center of the living room, a cardboard box open at his feet. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and memory. He moved with quiet purpose, not out of haste, but with deliberate care, choosing what to take, what to leave. He wasn't just packing items. He was selecting pieces of a life to carry forward. The photo frame on the mantel came first. Their wedding portrait, her eyes bright, his arm wrapped proudly around her. He dusted it gently with the edge of his sleeve before setting it inside the box. Next, from the bedroom, a small leather-bound journal. Pages filled with thoughts he never shared aloud. Letters he wrote after her passing. Words of grief, love, and forgiveness. Some addressed to his son. Most to her. In the bottom drawer of her dresser sat the music box, chipped at the corner, but still playing that soft tune she adored. He turned the key once, letting it play as he packed her favorite scarf beside it. Lavender scented. Still hairs. He didn't bother with his clothes. Just a few basics. A sweater she had knit for him one winter. Comfortable walking shoes. A single pair of cufflinks. In the garage, he opened an old cedar chest where they kept keepsakes. He found David's childhood drawings, school awards, a paper crown from his 6th birthday. He paused. He placed them back inside. Some things didn't belong to the future anymore. By evening, the house looked unchanged to the untrained eye. But Walter knew. It was lighter now. The things that mattered were with him. The things that didn't could stay. He stood by the window, watching the sun dip low behind the fence he'd mended every spring. His bones ached, yes, but his vision was clear. His heart steady. He looked down at the folder now labeled "To Ed," final instructions, tucked neatly beside the packed boxes. His son would never see it coming. And that was the point. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, a sound Walter had heard 1,000 times. He turned off the stove and poured the steaming water into his favorite mug, a chipped ceramic one that read #1 Dad in faded blue paint. David had given it to him when he was 10. He carried the cup out to the porch, the screen door creaking behind him, and settled into the old rocking chair. The wood groaned under his weight, familiar and forgiving. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the front yard, dancing through the leaves like it used to when he and his wife sat here in the evenings, sharing tea, silence, and unspoken love. He took a slow sip. The warmth ran through him, soothing, grounding. From here, he could see the tree David had once climbed and gotten stuck in. The driveway where he taught his son how to ride a bike, running alongside him, laughing breathlessly as he let go. The steps where he sat and read bedtime stories on warm summer nights. Books about dragons, planets, and brave little boys who believed they could do anything. Walter's gaze moved to the front door, still painted in the same shade his wife had chosen decades ago. Her flowers still bloomed beneath the windowsill, wilting a bit now, like the final note of a long, gentle song. He exhaled deeply, not with sadness, but with release. The house had held their joys, their griefs, their entire story. But a house was only as sacred as the hearts that respected it. And lately, those hearts had grown cold. Walter set his mug down on the porch railing and stood slowly, feeling the stiffness in his knees, the quiet reminder of time past. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, staring at it for a moment before placing it gently beneath the flower pot by the door. No note, no message, just a silent farewell. He turned to take one last look at the place he built, the place he was no longer welcomed in as more than a watchman. And with a quiet voice, he murmured to the wind, "Let them find what they truly deserve." Then he walked down the steps and didn't look back. The documents were signed in quiet corners. No fanfare, no drawn-out meetings. Just Walter, Ed, and a trusted buyer from a well-respected charitable trust known for converting residential properties into shelters for at-risk youth. Walter's one request: discretion. The buyer agreed. The deal closed quickly. Within 72 hours, ownership had transferred. The new organization wasted no time. Permits were expedited, and the demolition crew scheduled. There would be no drawn-out process, no warning left behind for those who thought they'd return to a home waiting patiently for them. On the morning of the third day, the bulldozers arrived. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as the home, that beautiful old house with blue shutters and hand-carved trim, was brought down piece by piece. A few asked questions. Most simply assumed it was part of a renovation. But inside Walter's heart, it wasn't destruction. It was a cleansing, a letting go, a return of dignity that had been quietly chipped away over the years. He had left the night before. A taxi picked him up just before midnight, suitcase in hand. No goodbyes. No letters on the kitchen table. Just the quiet click of the front door locking for the last time. His room, once filled with photographs and familiar warmth, stood bare now. Closets empty. Bed neatly made. The only sign he'd ever been there at all was the faint indentation in the carpet where his rocking chair once sat a day. By the time David and his family touched down in the airport, Walter was already gone. His phone line? Disconnected. The landline went straight to a generic voicemail. Mail forwarding? None. He vanished the way he lived most of his later years, quietly. But this time, with purpose. And somewhere, miles away, Walter stepped off a train in a coastal town where the air smelled of salt and second chances. A small rental cottage waited for him, overlooking the sea. No grand house, no heavy legacy, just peace. He didn't need to witness the aftermath. He already knew. They'd return expecting control. But all they would find was absence. And in that absence, a message louder than any confrontation. The SUV rolled into the neighborhood just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. Inside, David hummed along to the soft music, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his wife's knee. In the back seat, the kids chatted about sea turtles and shaved ice, their skins sun-kissed and glowing from the Hawaiian sun. Home sweet home, his wife smiled, stretching as they turned onto the street. But as the car approached the familiar corner, David's brow furrowed. Something was wrong. The mailbox was still there, green and slightly rusted. But behind it, where their house should have stood, was nothing but an open, leveled lot. No windows, no roof, no porch swaying in the breeze. Just flattened earth. The SUV jerked to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires. What the hell? David muttered, stepping out, heart racing. His wife followed, eyes wide. The kids went silent. They all stayed at the bare land, stunned. Then, David spotted it, a freshly planted wooden sign near the front of the lot, bright white letters carved cleanly into it. This land now belongs to the Children's Respite Foundation. New Hope Begins, hey. A logo sat beneath it, an open hand cradling a house, with children in silhouette above. David's jaw dropped. He blinked hard, as if willing the house to reappear. No, he whispered. No, this has to be a mistake. His wife clutched his arm. Where's your father? David's mind spun. He rushed to his phone and dialed Walter's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Still nothing. He tried the neighbor. Busy tone. The front lawn where his kids once played tag was now a flat stretch of packed dirt. The garden his father lovingly tended was gone. Even the tree swing had vanished, cut cleanly from the old branch. He stumbled forward, as if walking across a crime scene, unable to believe what he was seeing. The house wasn't theirs anymore. It wasn't his to inherit, to sell, to profit from. It was gone, and his father, the old man he'd pushed aside, had taken it with him, just not in the way David had ever imagined. David's hands trembled as he tapped the phone screen again. Still no ring, just the same robotic voice. The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please try again later. He tried the landline. Voicemail. Again. Then again. Dad, call me. What's going on? Where are you? No reply. Frustration tightened in his chest. His wife stood near the car, arms crossed, silent and pale. The children were still in the SUV, confused and afraid. This is to be illegal, David snapped. He can't just vanish. He can't just. He paused, breath catching. Or could he? Within the hour, he was speeding down Main Street, tires screeching as he pulled into the parking lot of Pearson Associates, the family law firm they'd known for decades. He stormed through the door, chest heaving. Marlene looked up from her desk, startled. Mr. Green. I need to speak to Ed, David said, voice hard. Now. Ed stepped out moments later, calm as ever. David, I was expecting you. You knew about this. David barked. You let him sell the house. Ed didn't flinch. Instead, he walked back into his office and returned with a sealed envelope. He asked me to give you this. Said you'd come looking. David snatched the envelope and tore it open, his fingers shaking. Inside was a single handwritten letter, penned in neat, slow script. David, you told me I was too old to fly, too fragile to stand beside my family. But I was strong enough to build that home. Strong enough to carry this family when no one else did. You left me behind like furniture, and now you are surprised the house is gone? I didn't leave out of spite. I left to remind you of something I hope you someday understand. Inheritance is not entitlement. I gave you everything once. But this time, I kept something for myself. Dad. David stayed at the letter. His throat burned. His pride fractured. He folded it back slowly, the weight of every word pressing down on him. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. Quiet. Unmistakable. Complete. David sat alone on a bench outside the law office, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. The midday sun was warm, but he felt cold, stripped of something he couldn't name. He read the words again, slower this time, letting them sink deeper into the silence that had followed him home. You called me too old to travel, too weak to be part of your joy. The words hit like a stone, not shouted, but written with a softness that stung far more. You left me behind to guard bricks. David could see himself, weeks ago, tossing the keys at his father, saying, just keep an eye on the house. He hadn't thought twice. He was proud of his new status, of being the one in charge. And now? So I gave the bricks to those who need shelter. He looked up, across the street at the bare land. A breeze stirred the dirt where their home once stood. A construction banner now hung loosely on the new fence. Soon, children without homes would play where his kids had grown up, but not because of his generosity. Because of his father's. You forgot your father, but I remembered myself. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't cruel. It was truth, quiet and sharp. David had seen his father as a burden, something to manage, not a man with history, purpose, or pain. He had forgotten that Walter was more than the title dad. He was a builder, a protector, a man who had sacrificed everything, and still kept giving. Until now. David folded the letter gently and pressed it to his chest, eyes stinging. It wasn't the loss of the house that hurt the most. It was realizing that his father had left not in anger, but in dignity. He had taken back his voice, his value, and in doing so, had written a final lesson more powerful than any lecture. This letter wasn't just goodbye. It was a mirror, and David, for the first time in his life, didn't like what he saw staring back. The sea stretched out before him like a soft blue quilt, stitched with waves and scattered sunlight. Walter sat on a weathered bench near the edge of the PU, a steaming cup of tea cradled in his hands. The scent of salt, pine, and fresh bread from the nearby bakery filled the air. Gulls called overhead. Laughter from a distant cafe drifted past on the breeze. It had been 3 months since he left everything behind. 3 months since he sold the house, vanished from the city, and began again, quietly, gently, and on his own terms. He lived now in a modest cottage near the coast, just 2 streets from the town library. A simple place with peeling white paint, a porch swing, and wildflowers growing freely along the fence. He didn't need much, just warmth, quiet, and room to breathe. Each morning, he walked the same route to the library, waving at the grocer, exchanging hellos with the cafe owner, and sometimes pausing to feed the stray cat that had adopted him. At the library, he helped shelve books, read stories to children during weekend sessions, and repaired torn pages with the same care he once gave to mending fences and roofs. No one here knew him as Dad or Grandpa or the old man in the back room. They just knew him as Walter, kind, patient, and always ready with a quiet smile. He didn't miss the house. He missed the memories, yes, but those lived inside him now, not in bricks. And without the weight of being constantly overlooked, ignored, or dismissed, he found something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. At night, he wrote in a small leather-bound journal. Sometimes a poem, sometimes reflections, often just quiet thoughts on aging, love, and what it means to be seen. One evening, as the golden light faded over the water, Walter sat by his window, pen in hand. The day had been simple, helping a boy find a book about space, sharing a sandwich with a librarian, watching the sea in silence. He turned to a fresh page in his journal and wrote slowly, deliberately. Age doesn't make you useless, but entitlement makes others blind. Some forget the hands that built their world, and some remember to walk away before they are erased entirely. He closed the journal, placed it on the windowsill beside his wife's photo, and let the sound of the ocean carry him into sleep. No anger, no regret, just peace, the kind only the forgotten ever truly understand, once they finally choose to remember themselves.